Greetings, fellow moviegoers, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CTS, and this is my pet gorilla, George. I'm sorry, I don't know how to start this one off. Right off the bat, this movie is, without a shadow of a doubt, the goofiest thing I've reviewed this season, and also one of the goofiest movies I've reviewed on this show. However, before I talk at length about it, allow me to lead you into this strange story of how this strange movie got made. So the history of this film's creation can be dated back to the year 1992, when Dracula was a big success at the box office. Francis Ford Coppola obviously had a hit on his hands, and was brought on as a producer to the other most popular horror novel at the time and its film adaptation. As far as directing status went, that went to Irish director Kenneth Branagh, most famous for his Shakespeare adaptations, as well as playing Gilderoy Lockhart in The Chamber of Secrets, and directed the first Thor movie, which I've been planning on revisiting since my overreaction review from 3 years ago. # shameless plug. Now, as far as my stance on Branagh as a director goes, he makes visually great looking movies and he always has a story to tell. But it's his egotistical view of himself that really bothers me, and that can actually affect the movie as a whole. That said, however, he is a great actor. His work in Tenet and Oppenheimer really impressed me, and him playing the foolish Lockhart was a great move on his part. So with Branagh starring and then directing this adaptation, you would figure this would be a big movie as much as Dracula was, right? Well, no, actually. The movie performed well at the box office, but it wasn't as profitable as Dracula was, nor was it as well received by critics and audiences. That unfortunately spelled the end of the horror movies from Francis Ford Coppola of the 1990s, leaving these stories to not have been adapted in a respectful manner since then. However, 30 years after its release, how well does it hold up? Clearly, it doesn't hold up well at all, but that's beyond the point. I have a job to do. So let's take a look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. As Victor Frankenstein, played by Kenneth Branagh, is dying, he shares a tale of a gruesome terror with a sea captain, played by Aidan Quinn. Victor, using previous experiments by a brilliant scientist, was able to bring a creature, played by Robert De Niro, assembled by body parts back to life. Once he realized how destructive his experiments had become, he abandoned the creature and tried to live a normal life with his fiancée, played by Helena Bonham Carter. The lonely creature seeks out Victor and demands one of two things: a bride or revenge. Considering I love Coppola's take on Dracula, you'd expect the same for Frankenstein. Well, I can confidently say that this movie is just bad. I'm sorry, guys. It's really, really bad. It's way too over the top and melodramatic for its own good. It takes itself so seriously that it believes that going extra over the top is good emotional storytelling, when in actuality that was never the case at all. The novel was shrouded in silent darkness and was sophisticated in regards to horror. The film makes it clear that it's dark and edgy, and does so by flat out telling the audience with over-the-top acting in every single scene that's meant to be scary. A lot of the time I found myself chuckling and even laughing at some points, and that's because the acting is far from sophisticated. I was thinking to myself that it was the one thing I hate from an acting performance in a horror movie. Hammy. My lord, this movie is so freaking hammy. I'll explain what that means in a minute, but clearly this was such a misfire in regards to adapting Frankenstein, and it shows. So let's go into this movie and break down the aspects of it so I can tell you my thoughts and prove my points. So why are all the characters in this movie sporting British accents? The story is set in Switzerland and all of the characters are English. Was that the case in Dracula? No, in Transylvania they had Transylvanian accents. And get this, the one character that is explicitly English in the book is an American here. I mean, that's just dumb. It's so insultingly dumb that I'm starting to miss the 2010 Last Airbender movie's miscastings. And no, I'm not giving you credit, Shyamalan. You will never get credit from me. Anyways, with that stupid point out of the way, I am happy to report that all of the characters are portrayed by great actors, but their performances aren't that great. Kenneth Branagh is a great actor, as stated before, but even he couldn't make this script sound convincing. I don't know what it is. I know he's trying his best to give a good performance, but he's also not really doing anything special with it. He's just kind of there and overacting in a lot of scenes, mainly in his emotional scenes. Every time I see his face, it looks like he's going to start crying all over the floor, and that's not exactly a good thing. I will, however, say this. Kenneth Branagh nails Victor Frankenstein's ego and his possessive love for Elizabeth, which, yes, I will talk about, so there's that at least. Helena Bonham Carter as Elizabeth is not worth being noted. She too overacts and is trying way too hard to make this script come off as serious. Her chemistry with Branagh is okay, and she has some pretty good moments, but by God, she's just kinda there for no apparent reason. Also, yes, this has the weird possessive relationship between Victor and Elizabeth, and you already know how I feel about that, so I'm not going to address it. Other than the fact that I cringed every scene where they were making out. That's all I have to say. As far as the other characters go, I don't know, folks, they're just kind of afterthoughts. Henry Clerval is killed off screen and also doesn't really do anything otherwise. Ian Holmes' Alphonse is barely in the movie and also dies off screen. Justine and the two professors felt kind of useless, and that's all there is to it. Also, Walton's barely in the movie, and I kind of forgot about him after watching it, which isn't a good sign. Regardless of the great actors playing these roles, I can't talk much about them because they aren't interesting or well written enough to do so. Alright, let's talk about the monster. How do you take one of the most well-rounded and dramatic actors of all time and turn him into one of the most iconic monsters of all time? Well, somehow, some way, they made it work. Robert De Niro gives a pretty good performance, the best one in the whole movie for that matter. Now, I don't think he's physically big enough for the character, but that doesn't matter. He played off the mannerisms of a lonely beast that wants companionship, but can't get any really well. He also played the sadistic side of the monster really well, killing for sport, taunting the men he hates most as well. It was a varied performance, and I thoroughly enjoyed whenever he was on screen. He's the highlight of the movie for me, without a doubt. Well done, De Niro. Now, go back to crime dramas. You're great at those. Anyways, moving on. Now, you can probably tell that the characters are not great. In fact, the one close to great is the antagonist, and that's because he's played by a great actor. Other than that, there's not really something great in regards to the characters in this movie. They're just kind of there, and that's all they really serve. There's not much else to say. Moving on. I can say that the makeup effects and the pyrotechnics do look great, however. They did a great job with making this monster look very much like a freak of science and not an otherworldly being like Karloff was. When they turn Elizabeth into an undead recreation, she looks even gnarlier with her head looking like it's gonna fall off. As far as the pyrotechnics go, whenever something is set on fire, it's in camera, and it looks menacing, specifically with the stunt person running through Frankenstein Manor towards the climax. There are some things that don't work, such as these really fake-looking electric eels, but that's really minute to me. The effects hold up really well, and it's cool that they were all practical. As far as the music goes, while I love Patrick Doyle as a composer, the score feels wasted in this movie. Look, it's great in a lot of areas, but it isn't utilized particularly well, and feels kind of cheaply slapped in there for good measure. Regardless, I'm a huge fan of Doyle's work, and there's nothing to scoff at in any stretch of the imagination. Now we move on to the tone. Was this movie scary? No. Not really, no. There's actually a huge problem with the tone that I am dedicating a large portion of the script to just for this alone. Remember how I said that this movie is overacted to oblivion? Well, that affects the tone of the movie in such a significant manner. How so? Well, let's talk about it. The problems immediately became apparent when watching the opening sequence of the movie. It felt like Kenneth Branagh was trying to make a swashbuckling action film, and Zorro hadn't even been released in theaters at that point. Not the next year. That made me realize at that moment this movie was going to be very hard to watch. And I was right. The scenes that were in the book that were silent and somber are completely transformed in this movie, and they were turned into something far more larger and over the top and hammy.
The death of William, Victor's younger brother, was told to Victor through a letter from his father in the novel. In this, he's killed in a scene where everyone is screaming, wailing, and there's a thunderstorm and the music is ramping up in tension. And it just made me and the people I was watching this with simply laugh because of how overdone it was. The very next scene wasn't much better, because it was also very over the top in nature, and it took away some of the urgency the scene was trying to convey. The death of Elizabeth, both times, also suffered the same fate. Hell, even something as simple as the birth of a child had to be over the top and covered in blood and screams. What? Why? Just why? How on earth am I supposed to take this movie seriously when the tone is so freaking over the top that it makes me freaking laugh? Am I supposed to be scared by this or having a ball? I don't understand. This was enough to kill the movie for me and made me respect it less than it wanted me to. Overall, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a movie that is overambitious and over the top. In trying to be scary, it achieves the opposite because it's insanely goofy and sometimes just plain stupid. Robert De Niro, the effects, and some of the music were great, but everything else is just not, which is why the movie gets a 4 out of 10. Not a terrible movie, but way too overambitious for its own good.
This took a lot out of me. I guarantee that something like this is going to happen. But there's nothing I can do about it. I hope you enjoyed this review. Certainly wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for your continued support. So tune in next week when I'm hopefully watching something more. With that said, my name is Mr. CCS. This is Mr. Central, and